Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
This week, we have Adam Nichols from Microsoft joining us on the show. He is a program manager for the Windows Autopatch team. Welcome, Adam. Can you give us a quick intro for our listeners?
Yeah, hi. Glad to be here. Technical title's product manager, but program manager, used to be one of those that we, take us back a little bit back in the day. Great to be here. Been with Microsoft about 7 years, spent 5 of those in the field. Actually 5.5 in the field, working with various customers literally all over the world. And then about almost at this point, man, I'm getting old, about 20 years in the industry, primarily with endpoint management and everything under the hood. So great and happy to be here. Talk about patching.
Woohoo.
Yes.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yes. And our listeners are well familiar with patching. We've definitely had a few shows on it. But what we wanted to do was do a deep dive on Windows Autopatch, which is one of the new services that Microsoft is offering. But before we get into that, I wanted to talk about just why it's so important. Kind of reiterate, because we do get some new listeners in the field, as well as veterans of the industry listening to the podcast. So there was an interesting post by Mark Simos, who is a cybersecurity architect with Microsoft. And he posted this graphic on LinkedIn that talked about the anti-patterns of patching. And Adam and I have alluded to this post for a few weeks now and wanting to do a conversation about it. But one of the points that Mark was making is that there are certain anti-patterns to patching, like things that are in the industry that we kind of make excuses for of why we can't patch, or some patterns that are common. So I'll just read some of these, and then I wanted to hear, we'll start with Adam Nichols. We've got 2 Adams today. What your thoughts are, and then maybe Adam Brewer, you can jump in and give some thoughts. So
you can just call us the Adams, like the Bobs on Office Space.
The Bobs.
Yep.
Exactly. Which is funny because I did watch another podcast, YouTube video with you in it, Adam, and there was another Adam as well on that one. So this is now the second time this is a Adam squared show.
Mm-hmm.
Well, great. I'm a huge Michael Bolton fan, so we're good.
So the first one that I'll just kind of read through some of these here. So some of the anti-patterns are caused by these feelings like attacks won't happen to us because it hasn't happened before or hasn't been detected. That whole security through obscurity thought. Also the keep the lights on kind of mentality. If it ain't broke, don't touch it. If you're patching something and it inadvertently breaks, and that's also kind of leads to the next one, where the incentives for most organizations favor availability. You want the things to work because as they're working, then you're making money or the business keeps on going. It doesn't really consider the risk of not patching it versus, keeping it going. Whereas, if you just have a little bit of downtime and patch that, then the organizational risk to an incident is much lower. So those are kind of the things that Mark talked about. And obviously, as I say them, anyone who's in IT, who's in endpoint management have, heard these come up before. So I just, what are your general thoughts on that, Adam?
Well, so early in my career, we had this conversation before we started recording about EMS, and I had the pleasure of really coming in to be a premier field engineer in Microsoft. So that's one of the engineers that kind of travel all over the States, all over the world, and work with different customers. And so literally every week I was in a different city, sitting in conference rooms with different customers, talking about, first of all, Windows 10, because Windows 10 was just launching at that time, and servicing, which was introduced with Windows 10, about this new model around servicing, where we were trying to really talk to customers about revamping the way they do patching. And it was funny because when we talked about this podcast, you said you're going to bring this up, and I was like, it's so funny. I just commented on that. These topics, and really when we say like, the kind of the thought that we're invincible, it's not going to happen to us, we're a small company, or, it's okay because the departments accept the risk of, if something bad happens, and you don't understand, we're just really different from everyone else, which is something, I've heard it, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And the sad thing is there are two cases, and I can't say the names of the companies, but where I remember sitting down with them across conference room table, really trying to like understand where they're coming from around patching. And, they're like, no, we're not doing servicing. We need the ability to like cut out and only apply what we think is applicable to our environment. And months later, hearing about a vulnerability and then, a malware attack, and, the efforts that had to go through, and a number of people that came in to rescue and, help build them back up again after a major exploit. And it really just it really makes you realize that no one's safe when it comes to cybersecurity, and patching is one of those kind of fundamental, items, in my opinion, to, just having a healthy and secure environment.
We talk a lot about avoiding chasing the shiny objects and just do the basics. I think somebody literally has that domain name at Microsoft for posting like security newsletters or something, just do the basics. But it's a good example of that. And I like Mark's post. I really encourage you, dear listener, go to the show notes, check it out. He's got it in kind of a PowerPoint slide format, and he's got these common objections, and then how we manage those objections, ways to overcome them, or to adopt a different posture moving forward. And what this reminds me of is a topic that I had many times with customers, not necessarily patching, Adam Nichols, but around passwords and getting more modern with how we approach passwords. And there's anti-patterns to passwords as well, where things that have been traditionally considered common sense approach really weren't. Things like complexity requirements, history requirements, periodic expiration. We've discovered over time that those inherently create more risk than they actually solve with passwords. So we had a lot of conversation in that space on anti-patterns. And it's a similar scenario where you will talk to people and it takes time to kind of it change their mindset, because they're very accustomed and have been told many times, this is the way you need to do it. And it takes a while to adjust that approach. And I think that's a little bit of what Mark's getting at here. So definitely check it out. Good stuff. And a great kickoff to today's conversation all about patching.
As we're talking through this, I want to hear what your thoughts are on task sequences, because as most sysadmins who have been in the business for a long time, they have often, used task sequences to do updates. Mm-hmm. And if we're moving to a servicing model, task sequences are valuable for other things, and they roll other things into that task sequence as well as updates. How, in your opinion, would sysadmins move to the servicing model but still take advantage of those other things in task sequences? Is it even possible?
Well, in my experience, the big reason for task sequences was controlled execution. Really that confidence that we are going to execute at a specific time. Like SCCM gave us the ability to seed the update or the package out to our entire environment a day or two before we plan to execute. And then we could execute really a large scale within relatively a small amount of time because the payload, the bits were already there. That was really what was so great about like tools like Configuration Manager, and there are a lot of third-party tools that operate in the very same manner, where they'll deliver the payload, they'll stage it, and then they'll execute it manually. And this is actually something that we're helping customers now as they onboard onto the Autopatch service. We're seeing the effects and some of the configurations that still linger from some of these third-party services as well as SCCM that still exist on these clients that are actually preventing servicing. Now back to your point about like that transition. We all remember like what happened during COVID, and I was working in the field during COVID. And one of the technologies I was largely supporting was AVD. And we got really busy because that product kind of was like 20th on the list of importance inside of Microsoft, and quickly just shot up to like number one overnight in terms of demand, because everybody was moving to remote or remote work at that point. And one of the things that we noticed, or everybody kind of felt, were those organizations and started seeing the flaws or the downfalls of these task sequences. These on-premise tools that were doing this execution, they were all reliant on line of sight. They were all reliant on, being on-premise. These VPN tunnels. I can't tell you how many VPNs, point-to-site or point-to-site VPNs that I help set up with customers into Azure, because their on-premise load balancers and VPN or concentrators could only support 10% of their infrastructure. So we were frantically helping customers trying to set up other ways. And one of the worst parts was one of my customers, I remember specifically, we barely got everybody up and running on VPN at one point, and then we started pushing out updates. And then what did we notice is just a huge influx of support cases, because update packages take a lot of time. So we had to do one of two things. We either had to throttle the updates way down so that they only trickled in while they were over the VPN to prioritize, business traffic. The problem is it took a long time to get the package out there, which extended it a period of time. But what we found is our success rate dropped dramatically. And a lot of these enterprises, we were running 98% success with patching. We had it down to a fine science with SCCM, but COVID threw that all on its head. So when you start looking at a lot of these task sequence-based execution, I think that there's still a place in the industry for them. But those are a lot of those, like, we're looking at isolated environments. We're looking at execution on production floors where we're still monitoring and managing production equipment that is very fixed in its workload and its maintenance schedule. But when we start looking at like the other 98, 99% of the industry, that is the types of actions that are killing enterprises at this point, because it's the cost and then the time that it takes and just the overall effort that it takes for patching. And I mean, we'll talk about this with Autopatch. Nobody enjoys, I shouldn't say nobody. I've not met an admin today that comes over and says, patching's a favorite part of my month. Like, I love patching. So, typically, I mean, you get down to task sequences, there's a place for them, I believe. It's just not in a modern world, and especially a hybrid world.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Autopatch.
Yeah.
What is Autopatch specifically for our listeners if they haven't read the news or heard anything about it?
Well,
that was a big breath there.
Where do I start? Autopatch is the greatest thing that you'll ever use in your entire life. No. Autopatch is a service provided by Microsoft, really aimed at simplifying patching and helping organizations achieve more with less. Again, that's the marketing term. But in short term, Autopatch is gonna simplify patching for you on a month in, month out basis and take care of a lot of the cogs, the efforts, the configurations, and just the monitoring that typically goes into patching. Those customers that are entitled to it, Microsoft's going to take care of a lot of that for them. So, and that's in a nutshell, it's simplified patching, if you believe me.
Well, you kind of transitioned perfectly into the next question, which is, what is the licensing required? You said if you're entitled to use it, how is a customer entitled to use Autopatch?
So this was one of the cool things about and I'm a Microsoft. I'm a firm believer in the Microsoft mission, helping every organization on the planet achieve more. And that was really kind of in the mission statement for Autopatch was we were going to find ways to help customers find additional value, take workloads off of their plates to make their lives easier. We want to make IT admins' lives easier. We want to give IT admins the ability to focus on things that are truly strategic and move away from things like patching. So the nice thing about Autopatch is there is no monthly upcharge for Autopatch. It's included with all Windows Enterprise licensing. So we talk about Windows E3, Windows E5, Microsoft 365, E3, E5, already are entitled to the service. So at that point, if you're an enterprise customer of Microsoft, simply enroll and take advantage of your benefits.
Does that also include the EDU licensing?
I didn't say EDU.
I'm just curious because we have gotten that question before from some of our listeners. When we say enterprise, does it also mean EDU?
No, I mean, unfortunately, EDU falls into a whole nother category. It's definitely something that's interesting. I know it's been a conversation that's gone back and forth. Definitely, the decision doesn't fall at our level. But it's definitely something we'd love to see opened up for EDU in the future. And hopefully one day it will be. But today, it's strictly enterprise.
And just to give listeners kind of a representative sample of what Adam just laid out, I have 29 customers that I cover. They're manufacturing customers in the Western United States. They range anywhere from 1,000 seats to 100,000 seats. 26 of my 29 customers would be entitled to use Autopatch. So the majority of large enterprise organizations already own all the licensing you need to take advantage of this.
And that's one of the great things is, oftentimes, especially in today's world with, the economic situation we're in, it seems like everything's going to cost us more money. I was feeling that today. My wife and I, we went out and grabbed some dinner, and I was like, wow, man, this is way more than I thought it would be. This is literally one of those services that helps just reinforce that value and that investment that customers have made into enterprise licensing of saying, hey, you know what? Let us help you. Let us do more for you. Let us take more off your plate. Let's increase that value. So,
does Autopatch also include, say, Office? Because there's deployment rings and updates for Office as well.
So Office is an interesting one. So there's only so much I can talk about when it comes to Office. Today in the Autopatch service, we incorporate Office, but it's very simple. Like I will tell you this, it's very simple. It leverages, we just set, when do you receive the update and how often do we advertise it, really to fall in line with our ring structure that we have in Autopatch. So definitely not a full featured. If you're used to like servicing profiles within Office, definitely a lot more mature. And actually, if you're using those within Office today for enterprise customers, it actually completely overwrites what we even push through Autopatch. But for your listeners, keep your ears open. There's going to be some updates possibly on that coming in the next few months. So definitely that story is going to evolve over time.
So it's a service that we offer.
Yep.
How does it work exactly? So once we onboard a device, which is done through the Endpoint Manager admin portal, there's a link to it to onboard your devices. What does Microsoft actually do for a customer?
So onboarding, actually, once you enroll your tenant, you actually enroll into the service, and we actually manage your entire tenant using a first-party app that we developed and integrated. That gives us the ability to actually push configurations into your tenant. So think about it a lot like we are performing the actions on behalf of your admin for you. And so your admin doesn't have to go in there, build, their WFB policies. They don't need to go in there and set configurations. They don't have to set the DSS policies. They can just enroll into the Autopatch service. And what the Autopatch service will do is it'll take really just say, once you've enrolled, once you've configured the onboarding, add your devices to a single enrollment group. And today, the way the service is made is once you add devices to that enrollment group, we automatically allocate them across dynamic rings and then schedule updates across them, and they'll start receiving updates as soon as that schedule kicks in. If your devices are missing updates and they automatically enroll, as soon as they check in, they'll start pulling down those updates and then reporting back through the service.
Do the devices have to be a certain device identity? Can they be hybrid Azure AD join? Can they be Azure AD join both? Obviously, I'm assuming they can't be domain joined, just pure domain joined.
Correct.
What about the other ones?
Yeah, we support hybrid Azure AD join. We support native Azure AD join, and we support co-management within SCCM with the right workloads moved over are all supported. We don't support registered today. So any Azure AD registered devices, so that would be like BYOD based devices, today aren't in support. It's definitely an interesting conversation around that. But traditional enterprise join types are all supported within the service within Intune management. So Intune's one of those prereqs requirements that once it's in place, then the enrollment can take place.
So really the benefit for the customer is we do have Windows Update for Business and the deployment rings for you to configure. If that's what you want to do and you have the time to do it and you want to get into it, that's all there. Mm-hmm. But the service is really allowing Microsoft to just do that configuration for you, so you don't even have to worry about figuring out which devices need to be in which rings, right? That's
absolutely it. So, think a lot about like when we talk about WFB and Windows Autopatch, WFB is the tool and Autopatch is the worker. And just like other tools that exist out there, there are a lot of tools in the Microsoft suite that the Autopatch team likes to take advantage of and just bring them together to make it easier for admins that don't necessarily want to invest the time, or they want to leverage that effort somewhere else. Seldomly did I ever work with customers where they said, I just have too much time on my hands and not enough to do. So
you talked about an enrollment group, a device group. Can you have multiple device groups? Can you use existing device groups?
So today you can use existing device groups into the enrollment, and that's just nested Azure AD groups. And so the devices have to exist in Azure AD. That's how enrollment's going to work. If you're using synced AD groups, you could use those to target into the Azure AD group. But you're not going to be, that's the way it would work today. We did talk at the Ask Microsoft Anything. I don't know if you guys had a chance to watch that. We did that with a group of our leads, and we introduced a concept that is coming called business groups. And business groups gives organizations and enterprises the ability to customize how their rings look. Autopatch today is very much like you enroll it and forget it. We take care of everything. And because of feedback, customers have asked for a lot more flexibility. And so we're introducing that into the service in calendar year 23. And with that, to your point, Andy, you can actually build your rings out and actually target them directly to the groups that you already predefined. So that gives you the ability that if you've already got predefined groups, kind of that structure, you'll be able to build it out and then just point them in and kind of maintain that kind of hierarchy. But today, if you really are, and this goes back to those, like we talk about those anti-patterns, if you're really trying to keep it simple, which is really the best approach for patching, you enroll them into the service, we're going to dynamically allocate them for you and monitor the rings and the progress through the rings for you. If that makes sense.
Yes. So simply stated, you don't really have a choice today, but that is also the beauty of it, where you don't have to think about it. You're just letting Microsoft pick the devices and the dynamic groups, and they're just allocating them into the rings for you. So it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. You're assuming the patching is just happening through the service.
And a lot of our larger customers that have onboarded, that's one of the biggest feedback that we're trying to stay true to is they're like, it just works. So we can enroll, and once they're enrolled, they just start doing their thing, and then I get a report at the end of the month that tells me how I'm doing, and that's all I want. And so that's what we're trying to keep, the spirit of the simplicity and the just works, also introducing the capabilities so enterprises, and especially larger enterprises, can really flex on. So,
what happens if there's a patch, which, sometimes it does happen, breaks something and you have to roll back? Is it on the customer to monitor when something breaks, and is it also on them to roll it back themselves, or is there some part of the service that can do that?
So there is a built into WFB, they have, I should say built into Windows, there is a component that rolls back Windows updates, and we're working on integrating that into the Autopatch service. We haven't announced a timeline, but fairly confident it's going to be in calendar year 23 that we'll see something like that integrated into the service. What Autopatch will do today is if we see a large scale failure or patch that is troublesome or causing a high level of failure that's greater than our acceptable rate, because there's always, we know with patching, we know with any software deployment, there's always going to be a level of failure that exists. You're never 100% on anything. But if we're constantly, above that 95%, we continue to roll out through rings. When we get concerned is when that number drops down. And what we can do in the service today is we can do what we call service pause. And if we are evaluating our very first ring, which is, we call it our test ring, and we patch the test ring on Patch Tuesday, we monitor it over a day, and then we kick off fast. And between those two rings, we really evaluate the performance of that update and really the reliability. And if we see something that's out of touch, if it meets our or fails our release criteria, we'll pause our fast and broad, and we'll resolve it, or we'll work with the broader teams to resolve that before releasing it to your environment. Customers also have the ability too that if they notice something on a macro level, so let's say they notice with an independent or an individual department that there is something that's failing, they have the ability also to go into the console and pause at an entire ring level, which is pretty slick. And one of the things that Autopatch can do that is not available in other tools today is you have a long-term pause. So with traditional tools, you have to go in and reset your pause like every 15 days to 30 days. You can set your pause in Autopatch and it'll stay paused until you unpause it, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. So,
well, I want to dig into something you just said a little bit before that, when you were talking about Microsoft kind of having that macro view of patching success across all organizations enrolled in Autopatch. And a common theme on this show has been, in order for organizations to secure themselves, it's an imperative they take advantage of cloud scale and cloud visibility and having that intelligence that's greater than just their little circle of the world, their little organization. And you could even still be a big organization, but you're still little in the big scheme of things. And this now brings that same sort of intelligence that we've had for things like malware on device that we do through Defender today, and brings that to patching, where now your admins, without any effort on their part, can possibly have, if there is a patch that has an issue, that can be patched because it's been discovered at a macro level, maybe even before it's impacted your organization. That's really powerful. That gives you intelligence, insight, and visibility you didn't have before, and you don't even have to do anything to do it. It's actually just part of the service. And I think that's really cool, and a theme, again, that we reiterate so frequently on this show is you have to broaden your perspective because things move so quickly, and you can determine patterns in data the broader and more diverse your data set is.
Absolutely. And that's kind of the benefit of a lot of this, when we talk about cloud and we say, that giant cloud of Microsoft, but that's where a lot of enterprises are seeing the value, and they're seeing that collective, sharing of information and leveraging that to make more intelligent decisions that really help protect environments and drive additional value. And that's where patching, we were talking to an organization the other day about patching, and they go, it wasn't feature updates that hurt us. They go, it's the monthly security updates because feature updates are pretty well vetted. I mean, you can vet a feature update, you're not trying to push those out within hours or days. You're pushing those out over a couple months. But security updates, a lot of times, because they're addressing CVEs, and we know that some of these 0 days and patching CVEs are pretty impactful on environments, especially customers that have legacy, a lot of legacy. And so being able to take that shared knowledge and pull it together is definitely one of those tools that we try to, always constantly improve within the Autopatch service.
So when I think of the customers that I support, I'd say it's pretty common for them to be hybrid joined for their Windows devices today. It's pretty common that they've at least dipped their toe in the water of co-management. They may have Intune management on most of their Windows PCs, although they're not doing anything with it today. And so customers like that, they're pretty much ready to go, it sounds like, from a prerequisite perspective. But do you run into customers who haven't jumped over those hurdles yet, and they want to get to Autopatch, and maybe this is the carrot that drives them there? Are you seeing some of that for orgs that haven't embraced, what we call, quote unquote, modern management to kind of get there so they can take advantage of Autopatch?
So this was very surprising to me. And I mean, it probably shouldn't have been, because I worked, I've worked in the field long enough that I know, AD hygiene is one of those things that we all know is absolute horrendous in a lot of enterprises.
Yes.
So we were looking at the early numbers during the enrollment of Autopatch in private preview, public preview, and then going into GA. And one of the big concerns was the amount of devices that we considered ineligible. So you can enroll devices into Autopatch by simply adding the Azure AD computer object into our enrollment group. And then we have a service in the background that picks that device up, registers it in the service, validates the prerequisites, and then prepares it and presents it for management. And we had about a 50% failure rate of prereqs. And we're like, what did we do wrong? Like, what's going on? So we're digging through these devices, and what we're finding is we're finding a large number of devices that existed in AD, Azure AD, as hybrid join or, Azure AD join, but didn't have Intune enrollment. Mm-hmm. And that right there was a huge one of devices that failed because of no Intune enrollment, or they were just stale devices. And as we started, we had a team that was heavily looking into that. We realized that was, like a lot of enterprises realize, it's kind of a black hole. No one's going to clean up Azure AD or AD for a customer. I mean, that just doesn't happen. But we're finding a lot of enterprises, especially today, after, many years, and Andy and Adam, I think we've all had these conversations with customers around modernization, the need to be more agile, the need to be more flexible, and giving people the ability to work where they're more productive. And that's starting to resonate with more and more customers. And as that resonates more and more, we start having larger customers come over that, to your point, Adam, are like, hey, look, we know we need to do this. It turns out we own all of it. Mm-hmm. How do we get there? And that's an interesting one. Luckily, because these aren't new conversations in the Microsoft sphere, getting there is actually very easy. And getting the enrollments in place, Intune pushed out is very simple to do now in an enterprise environment, and is it agentless, which makes it very easy. So as we start seeing those, we start seeing this transition from a lot of third-party patching into tools like Autopatch and Wolfbee that exists out there.
So you mentioned that the enrollment is at a tenant level, and then there's some back-end magic where we're pushing out the management. Is there an agent or anything that, as part of Autopatch, has to run with the service once the devices are enrolled?
Mm-hmm. So we leverage an agent that does monitoring for us. And so part of the benefits of Autopatch is, and a lot of these have yet to kind of show their value to our customers yet, but is a lot of the data insights that we're collecting to understand about the pre and post update impact of an update on an individual device, and also our ability to proactively remediate failed updates. So we leverage an agent that is deployed to all devices that are enrolled. that do that monitoring for us, and it runs on the device locally. So,
Gotcha.
yep. It's also,
What about?
oh yeah.
Oh, go
I
ahead.
was going to say it's the same agent actually that we're using across a number of Microsoft services, like Windows 365 leverages it as well. So
Similar to like the log analytics
yeah,
or the AMA Azure Management
Azure,
Agent.
yeah, similar but a little bit more robust. So
Gotcha.
yep.
So what about out of band updates? So
Yeah.
if there's like a critical security update that happens out of band of the patch Tuesday, is there a way to address those within the auto patch service?
Yeah, we address those. So if there's, let's say, WSD or Windows Servicing releases an out-of-band update, maybe happens maybe once a year, very rarely twice a year, and sometimes it doesn't even happen within a calendar year. But these are going to be mission-critical zero-day patches that we deem at a high enough threat level that will build a release and will release it out into the wild. That within Autopatch today, and we actually have some new capabilities that are coming to address that from a visibility perspective. But if you're an Autopatch customer today and one of those come out, we initiate what we call an expedite, service-led expedite. And within the service, if there's a zero-day patch that comes out, it will expedite to your environment within 24 hours. We force a reboot of that being published to the device. So really, from our perspective, we're going to get it out there as quickly as possible, apply it to your environment, force a reboot because we know a patch is never complete until that reboot occurs, and force that reboot typically within 24 hours. We do have a capability that's coming very soon for customers to opt out of expedite and out-of-band updates, but we also have additional capabilities that when those out-of-band updates come, you'll also see them in your release schedule blade, which exists under devices in the Intune portal. So today you'll see all your traditional releases, and pretty soon you'll see if there are out-of-bands, they'll show up in there as well.
You mentioned reboots, and I just, that's a pain point for a lot of users, right?
Oh, yeah.
The policy that is required for IT when they see the thing pop up, how many times you can dismiss it, and how urgently you need to reboot. Is it now? Do I have to close out all my stuff? Is that something that you would configure for the customers in Autopatch? And then also, is there a choice to change any of those options once they've been done, if we do it?
Yeah. So we preset those today. Like we said in this early release of Autopatch, we set it based upon Microsoft best practices, and that's the way we put it out. What we found is a large number of customers. I'm kind of embarrassed to say the number that do actually modify the underlying policies to change those reboot cadences, to stretch them out a little bit, or some of them even shorten them up. And in conversations with customers, a lot of customers, we found that there are a lot of different expectations around reboots. And we know this from in the field, and we look at like those anti-patterns for patching in Simos's article. This is one of those, is the downtime. And customers are like, rebooting a computer is detrimental, it's lost work. In the wrong, if in a poorly configured environment, typically it is lost work. I'll be honest. If you aren't leveraging modern tools like OneDrive, if you're not leveraging modern tools like Office 365 or Microsoft apps, there is a strong possibility that some data could be lost if you're using legacy tools, because they don't do a very good job of saving. They don't do a really good job of recovering when they reboot, stuff like that. In a modern Microsoft world, and this is where the awesome thing of Microsoft having that holistic view across many of our products is you look at Office, and if you reboot a computer that you have an Excel spreadsheet open on, it saves it, and typically it's right there when you reboot the computer after an update. Same thing with like Word, Outlook, and different tools like that. So when we talk about the impact, there is definitely an impact there. Couple cool things is today, reboot schedules are the way they are. We've got some really cool stuff around reboot schedules that are actually coming with our business groups that give customers the ability to get to pretty fine-grained capabilities in saying, I want to do this when, and I want to force a reboot, or I always want to honor what, Windows 10 and Windows 11, big thing is active hours, which Windows will manage, the user's activity and not reboot during active times on the device.
Listeners, if you haven't experienced how Windows 11 handles patching and forced reboots, you should experience it. It's incredibly elegant. And I realize who signs my paychecks, but still, I've been in this industry a long time. I've seen some not so pleasant experiences. Windows 11 is so like gentle to kind of knock on your door and be like, hey, I've got an update. When would be a cool time to do this? Do you want to do this now? It'll take 2 minutes and it'll give you an estimate of how long it takes and everything. It's really slick, and it's in very user-friendly language. So even your non-technical users can understand what's being told to them. It gives them several options to choose from. And it's really a very good experience for something that's never going to be a great experience, but makes it about as painless as possible. I think it's really well done in Windows 11. So if you haven't checked that out yet, if your org's still on Windows 10, as you start to do your Win 11 evaluation, that's one thing you should check out because it's really well done.
I was going to say, and to that point, a lot of people think of reboot controls in Windows 11 as a UX feature, user interface feature. It's really a security feature. Whatever we can do to make it easier for the user to, initiate that reboot, get back to productivity as quickly as possible, improves our ability to execute on security patching and respond to security incidents, which is awesome. So
that's a really good point, because it almost, the way it does it almost incents you to do an update, because as opposed to like do it now or stop asking me, and then it eventually like forces you. It's like, hey, can I do this in 3 hours? Are you going to be done working then? And you can be like, yeah, do it then. And I mean, it's that actually gets the reboot done sooner because you empowered the user to pick a time that's going to work for them.
Absolutely.
Mentioning security, I would be remiss, this being a security podcast. I'm sure there's a few security admins out there who are like, oh, I have to give access to Microsoft through this service. What level of access are we getting when users enroll their tenant into the service? Are they getting, is Microsoft getting administrative rights to something? Certainly probably not global admin rights, but there may be something that we have access to that you're giving up to Microsoft as part of the service.
The great thing, and I'm really happy about this within Autopatch, we have quite a few security-minded product managers, me being one of them, coming from the field, understanding how important security is to customers, and really a lot of, when we talk about modern management, everything kind of starts with security and kind of morphs out of there. So within Autopatch today, we deploy what we call a first-party application, and that's a native Azure application, which is trusted within the Microsoft ecosystem, or really the Azure backbone. So the nice thing about that is that runs in the background in your tenant, bypassing conditional access, bypassing traditional, user-based auth, and just runs in the background, certificate-based trust with our service, and we maintain the certificate on that. That application, any customer who's enrolled into the service can actually see that application today. If you go into Azure Active Directory, Enterprise Applications, remove your filters and just search for Modern, and it's Modern Management. It's called Modern Management. And within there, you can actually go down to the permissions assigned to the application. And the conversation we had with our devs when we sat down moving, because we used to have an old, in the past, in the very early days, we had a user-based model, a user account, a service account, for lack of a better term. And when we moved to the first-party app, we really were like, all right, what's the minimum permissions we can get away with and still operate the service? And when we had those conversations, there were some like, oh, we need this. And I'm like, all right, so if I cut you down to read-only, what's that going to do then? Well, not really anything. I'm like, all right, then it's read-only. So what you're going to find in many of the cases, you're going to see a lot of like read-only in groups, because we have to evaluate the groups that exist there. But we create our own groups for the service, and we assign ourselves owners, so we can pull those groups back if we need to swap them out. we give ourselves the ability to read like configurations on the devices, but we don't give ourselves the ability to modify existing configurations. But you do have the ability, we do have the ability to deploy new configurations and stuff like that. So it's not a specific, permission level within Intune. We're actually just granting ourselves rights through a number of graph calls to your tenant. And those are all, publicly available and auditable. So
that's great to hear.
Yeah.
So final question, because the one caveat to Autopatch is that it is for Windows 11, essentially the modern desktop operating system. But of course, in an enterprise, one of the headaches of patching is also patching servers, which are running workloads and applications that also probably can't have downtime. So how do, and we don't have to dive to this because we want to focus on Windows Autopatch, but just quick, what's your opinion on patching for servers in an automated fashion?
So, there are a lot of tools out there for patching servers. It is not in the preview or in the purview of Autopatch today to address servers. Really, this should be no surprise. A lot of server management in the eyes of modern technology is cloud. The idea of pizza boxes running Windows Server is really a thing of the past. Whether they're running, they could be running like Azure Arc or something like that. But the idea is whenever it comes to server management, the primary tool that we recommend to customers is using Azure patching, Azure Automation patching. And that's a great tool, and you can run that actually on your on-premise hardware as well as in your Azure-based workloads as well, and gives you a lot of that capabilities of scheduling. You look at servers, and typically in my experience working with enterprises, servers are always patched by a different team than endpoint, and typically managed separately. And that's why those workloads, when they start getting separated, we don't see a lot of love lost between the two groups. And so in servers, you typically have a set time every month that you're going to patch at this time, at this date. And then if you're running, clusters or anything like that, you're patching this half this date, this half this date. Whereas with workstations, we organize those quite a bit differently. But it's always a good question because it comes up in every enterprise conversation because people are like crossing their fingers like, Microsoft, just do it for me. So, but if you use the Azure Automation patch management, you can schedule it there and really forget it and monitor it through there as well. So,
yeah, it works really well. In fact, for my demo tenant, I have a server in my house where I host several Windows server VMs, and I got to a certain point where I was patching them manually, which is fine if you have like one or two, but I have like 5 or 6 now, and to go in manually to patch each one of those was a pain. So I thought, why don't I give this a try? I onboarded all of them to Azure Arc, Azure Automation, and I don't even have to worry about it. It just patches it automatically for me. So it also works for third party for our listeners. If you're in AWS or GCP, the Azure Arc agent can be installed on there, and then you can still have visibility within Azure and use automation. I have a server that's in AWS that I have onboarded with Azure Arc. Same thing, the automation just patches that automatically. So it works really well.
I'll throw out a plug for a former guest on our show. John Joyner did a show with us to talk about Microsoft Sentinel way back when. But John literally wrote the book on Azure Arc. So if you want to learn more, check out John's book on Azure Arc. It's phenomenal.
All right. Well, that's our show for this week. Adam, thank you so much for taking some time out on a Friday night and coming to talk to us about Windows Autopatch. Hopefully our listeners take advantage of the service if they're entitled to it, and if you want to, not have to worry about patching. So appreciate you being on the show.
I'm so happy to be here, and if your listeners have comments or concerns, they can find me on Twitter. I have kind of a crazy handle. It's Mauvlan, Mauvlan. But I'd love to hear feedback, and if you see a lot of the the tweets that I have going around and a lot of the conversations is with people on Twitter just about Autopatch and recommendations and stuff that we'd like to see changed. It's awesome. Great community. Thank you.
Well, thanks for listening and watching as always. Our contact information will be in the show notes if you guys have any questions or comments on future shows. Thanks, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.